Hello, dear viewers of my channel. Great to see you all. Today, we dive into one of the darkest and most dramatic pages of the Second World War in the Pacific, the Fall of Bataan. What really happened during the Japanese invasion of the Philippines? Why did an army that was supposed to hold out 6 months end up in captivity? And what was daily life like in that fatal winter and spring? Enjoy the video. Why did Japan attack the Philippines? Strategic calculation and the empire's hunger. To understand the fall of Bataan, we first need to understand why Japan needed the South and why the Philippines were at the center of the blow. By the beginning of 1941, Japanese expansion in Asia was in large part driven by economics. Japan depended on imported oil, rubber, tin, and other raw materials necessary to keep its military and industrial machine running. Sanctions and embargoes imposed by Western powers in response to aggression in China were choking Tokyo's economy and accelerating the adoption of radical measures. The Philippines mattered for two main reasons. First, geography. The islands lay on the route between Japanese bases and the resource regions of Southeast Asia, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, and could serve as a springboard for U.S. operations in the region. Second, symbolism. Control of the Philippines would strengthen the security of Japan's southern flank and provide convenient airfields and naval bases to protect Japanese convoys. From this came the strategy: strike everywhere, intensify pressure on British Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, and the Philippines before the United States and its allies could prepare and respond. So when, in December of 1941, plans were put in motion for a rapid, lightning strike against Western positions, the Philippines became a primary target, not only as an island territory, but as the backbone of the entire Southern campaign. Japan's campaign to seize the Philippines began simultaneously with the full-scale strikes against U.S. bases. On December 8, 1941, local time in the Philippines, the same morning the attack on Pearl Harbor echoed across the Pacific, Japanese air forces struck air bases and airfields around Manila, chiefly Clark Field. The blow was swift and aimed at destroying American air power on the ground. To a large extent, that objective was achieved. Many aircraft were wrecked on runways and in hangars, so at the early stage, American and Philippine forces lost a decisive share of their air combat capability. At the same time, Japan prepared a naval operation, landings on the northwestern coast of Luzon, in the Lingayen Gulf area, enabled corps to go ashore and begin a rapid advance toward the capital. During December and January, Japanese units pushed forward, breaking local resistance, severing supply routes, and gradually forcing U.S. and Philippine command onto the defensive. It should be understood that the Japanese employed a combined, compact approach: air power, naval infantry, tanks, mainly light Type 95 Hago tanks, and artillery. They sought rapid concentration of forces at key points and the destruction of the enemy before he could receive organized help from outside. The American plan: retreat to Bataan as a delaying operation. U.S. command in Asia under General Douglas MacArthur realized by late December and January that a direct victory on the plains of Luzon was impossible. The plan foresaw retreating to Bataan and the fortified position of Corregidor in Manila Bay to buy time, hold out 6 months while reinforcements arrived and supply lines were reestablished. It was a strategy of delay, not an attempt at immediate counterattack. The retreat to Bataan began when supply lines and communications became untenable. By occupying positions on the narrow isthmus of the peninsula, the remnants of the forces were supposed to be resupplied by sea and to strengthen their defenses. But in practice, there was almost no resupply. Japan controlled the skies. Its submarines and small combat vessels threatened convoys, and the U.S. fleet had been weakened by losses and redeployments. As a result, the troops who ended up on Bataan received only the bare minimum from higher command. On the peninsula, two conceptually different armies faced each other. On the American-Philippine side were corps and divisions organized under the United States Army Forces in the Far East, USAFFE, regular U.S. units and mobilized elements of the Philippine Army, poorly supplied. Numerous documents and memoirs emphasize that Filipino soldiers fought with incredible tenacity, despite shortages of ammunition and medicine. The commander of USAFFE was General Douglas MacArthur, who was soon ordered to evacuate to Australia. He was assigned to lead the campaign in the South Pacific. He left in March of 1942. After his departure, the effective theater commander was Lieutenant General Wainwright, and the direct commander on Bataan was Major General Edward K. King. These leaders faced the grim task of preserving their soldiers' lives once it became clear that reinforcements and supply were not forthcoming. Opposing them was the Japanese 14th Army Corps under General Masaharu Honma, a well-trained formation operating with effective Japanese coordination of air and infantry. They had the initiative, combat power, and, crucially, steady supplies made possible by Japan's control of the sea. That material superiority ultimately proved decisive. Conditions of defense: hunger, disease, and moral strength. Fighting on the peninsula dragged on for months, January, February, and March of 1942. Both sides suffered losses, but for the Americans and Filipinos, the question soon became not simply lose or win, but survive. Four key factors defined the situation. Food and fuel supplies. The United States was unable to deliver needed food and fuel. Troops were undernourished, rations were reduced, and that quickly eroded combat effectiveness. Tanks sat idle awaiting fuel. Artillery waited for powder. Disease. Tropical climate, poor sanitation, and early shortages of medicine led to outbreaks of malaria, dysentery, and tuberculosis. Wounds that would heal under proper care became complicated infections in the face of hunger and poor hygiene. Many died not from bullets but from disease. Maintenance and spare parts. Heavy equipment stood idle without repair. Bearings seized. Engines did not receive routine servicing. The reason was the lack of spare parts and a shortage of qualified mechanics. Morale. Here, the best and worst of human nature showed. Troops, especially Filipinos, often displayed heroic endurance. Community ties and civilian support bolstered resistance. But as resources dwindled, morale fell. Individual spirit could not replace food and medicine. Defense turned into a fight for every forkful of rice and every cartridge. Soldiers became gaunt shadows of their former selves. Their focus shifted from tactics to the elementary goal of holding positions until the end.
Japanese tactics, jungle warfare, and the slow exhaustion method. The Japanese had a plan blending frontal pressure with actions against the rear. After a series of frontal assaults and localized breakthroughs, the strategy shifted. The Japanese began to slowly push defenders out of strongpoints, sever supply lines, and create false threats. Maneuvers with counterattacks, shelling, and night raids. In the jungle, on muddy roads, and in humid conditions, light Japanese tanks and the mobility of their infantry gave them an edge. The Japanese also used air power to apply constant pressure. Aircraft pounded positions, airfields, and depots, denying defenders the ability to replenish. Artillery and mortars worked at night, wearing down sleeping men, destroying dugouts and sapping strength. A crucial point: Japanese command applied a tactic of exhaustion to create conditions in which the defense could not fight effectively because of constant shortages. It was not necessarily one crushing blow. It was a series of tactical moves in which every missing food parcel and every unreplaced round reduced the chance of resistance. The final days, the decision to surrender and its consequences. By early April of 1942, the defenders' situation was critical. Medicines and food had run out. Junior officers reported mass illness and the inability to fight effectively. The on-site commander, Major General Edward K. King, faced a terrible choice: die with his men and drive them to complete annihilation, or surrender in order to save the survivors from certain death. The decision was agonizing, but on April 9, 1942, he signed the surrender of Bataan. The number who surrendered is one of the tragic aspects of this story. Approximately 75,000 to 80,000 troops, including U.S. and Filipino servicemen, fell into enemy hands. It was the largest surrender in U.S. history to that date, and it foreshadowed a terrible retribution. After the surrender, Japanese forces did not observe the rules on the treatment of prisoners as dictated by international norms. Instead, the horrific march began, now known as the Bataan Death March. Prisoners were driven in columns toward the camps. Along the way, they faced kilometers without water or food, under a blazing sun and freezing nights. Those who fell from exhaustion or disease were killed on the spot. How many people died during the march is not known exactly. Estimates vary. Post-war investigations produce different figures, from several thousand to tens of thousands dead, especially among Filipino troops, whose losses are often considered particularly high. American deaths are reported in sources as ranging from several hundred to a few thousand, depending on the account. The causes of the brutality were multiple. First, racial and ideological contempt. The Japanese military culture emphasized discipline and often did not view prisoners as equals. Second, logistical difficulties. Japan itself lacked transport and camp capacity, and therefore could not quickly house and feed tens of thousands of captives. Third, revenge and combat psychology. Harsh treatment of prisoners sometimes reflected retaliation for stiff resistance the Japanese had encountered in preceding months. All these factors combined to produce a humanitarian catastrophe. What Japan sought on Bataan and how it ended strategically. Japan's immediate and long-term interest in the peninsula was not limited to the land itself. Control of the Philippines meant control of Pacific sea lanes, the ability to protect routes to Southeast Asian resources, and denying the United States a convenient base from which to strike Japanese supply lines. For Japan, Bataan was a link in a larger chain, and its fall provided access to the next priority, consolidating the region. Strategically, the outcome was mixed. On the one hand, the fall of Bataan and the later surrender of Corregidor dismantled the early American military presence in the Philippines and gave Japan a freer hand in the region. On the other hand, the brutality and fate of the prisoners, carried loudly around the world, mobilized American public opinion and strengthened resolve to retaliate. The story of Bataan, its death march, and mass losses entered American and global narratives as one of the motivational points for the inevitable return, where MacArthur's words, "I shall return," gained a bloody justification. After the war, many Japanese commanders and perpetrators were tried. Cruelty in the treatment of prisoners and mass killings became part of the Nuremberg and regional tribunals' cases. The Bataan Death March formed the basis of charges of war crimes. But memory is complex. Peoples who survived these events need not only justice, but an understanding of why it all happened. The lessons that remain are manifold. In military terms, a lesson about the importance of logistics and sustaining a front. Without supplies, even the bravest cannot hold out long or protect civilians. In humanitarian terms, a lesson on the inadmissibility of dehumanizing the enemy. When a human being ceases to be seen as human, crimes against humanity follow. In political terms, a warning about how geopolitical calculations and economic needs can drag entire peoples into war. In the end, the desire to retake the Philippines became one of the driving forces of the American campaign in the Pacific. In October of 1944, the landing of American forces on the Philippines began, and in 1945, liberation commenced. But the memory of Bataan remained, as a warning, as mourning, and as a demand to remember the truth.